Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 104 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Now, episode 104 was actually scheduled to be broadcast 2 weeks ago, but that was actually the date when Mercury went retrograde, and any astrologer watching will know that one should expect the unexpected when that occurs, and it was certainly no disappointment in my case. I actually left to come to the studio, but then events took over, and I won't bore you with the details, but suffice to say, I didn't make it. Anyway, I'm here this evening, and it's probably just as well, actually, because I had invited this evening's guest to join me 2 weeks ago, but unfortunately, she wasn't able to. But she is with me tonight, so in a few minutes we'll be meeting with Dilyana Gaytandzhieva, a truly outstanding Bulgarian investigative journalist. I mean, that rare breed that doesn't really exist too much in the UK these days. But Dilyana is going to be sharing her insights into the recent bullshit that has manifested in the UK with the Sergei Skripal affair and, of course, the subsequent attack on Syria. Now, I'm also pleased to say that Dilyana will be joining us at the AV conference, which is not this weekend, the following weekend, the 4th to the 7th of May. So this is AV 9. Funnily enough, the title's a bit of a giveaway. It is the 9th AV event of the last decade. And I'm sorry to say, for those who haven't yet booked their weekend tickets, that the event for residential guests is sold out. But there are still a number of day tickets available, so if you're interested in sampling AV and want to spend a day, then the day tickets are available online. And this year we are running a complimentary taxi shuttle between Milton Keynes Station and the conference venue. So if you want to come along on the day and you don't drive, then you can get the train to Milton Keynes and catch the taxi, which will leave the station each day at 8:30. We have an outstanding lineup, and just to give a quick rundown of the schedule, you can see the detail of this online, but if you're thinking about coming along for one of the days, then on the Saturday, as with tradition now, the conference will be opened by Brian Gerrish, who will be followed by Patrick Henningsen, and then Dilyana, who you will meet shortly. Then a speaker that I'm not able to name for reasons that will be explained at the event, but that speaker will be speaking about the suppression of cancer cures and their own personal experiences of the magnitude of the power of Big Pharma and the state to shut down any effective cancer cure. And then on Saturday evening, there will be another truly outstanding presentation from Dr. Graham Downing, who will be further developing the theme that he introduced last year of the rush towards artificial intelligence and the move to transhumanism. And then in the evening, for something different, we have Canoenos Rising, an outstanding folk rock band from the north of England who will be playing through the evening. Then on Sunday, we have Jay Dyer coming over from Tennessee, who will be talking about esoteric Hollywood. Alex Thompson, who will be familiar to regular viewers of UK Column. The title of his talk is The Inventors of Evil Things. And then Mark Steele, the guest on my last broadcast of Humanity versus Insanity, who'll be talking about 5G and the existential threat. And we'll be touching on 5G a bit later on in the program this evening. And then two speakers who are always welcome at AV events, Max Egan and Thomas Sheridan. And then on Sunday evening, we have the big debate. And the debate topic is: this house believes that humanity as we know it is on the cusp of either a massive upgrade in consciousness or extinction. And I have to say that the person that we have proposing the motion, and that is that humanity is on the brink of mass extinction, I can promise you will absolutely shock the audience to the absolute core. And for that reason, I'm not able at this juncture to name that person. I think that we'll maximize the effect when that person takes the platform. And then on Monday, a little different from previous years, we have 3 speakers on the Monday morning. John Wedger, the now retired former detective constable of the Metropolitan Police, who will be talking about his experiences as a whistleblower of the systemic child abuse in the metropolitan area of the capital of this country. Then Terry Boardman, who last spoke at, I think it was AV3, so that was about 9 years ago. And his talk is Life After Brexit, Britain and the End of the EU. One can dream. And then the event will be closed by Benny Wills, speaking in the UK for the first time. And Benny will have everybody, I think, in the right frame of mind as they walk away from AV9. And the title of his talk is Be Bold, Be the Change, and Laugh in the Face of Evil. And then on Monday afternoon, we have the speakers' workshops. And obviously, they will be announced through the weekend. And they are open to all of the delegates, whether they're there as a resident or as a day visitor. So a very full program. And as unfortunately is always the case, I'm probably the least sociable person at AV because somebody has to keep the show on the road. But, one of the unique elements of Alternative View is that everybody is under the same roof for 3 days, and everybody has the opportunity to engage the speakers in informal discussion and conversation. So I'm looking forward to an absolutely fantastic weekend, and I'm also very much looking forward to welcoming Dilyana, who is on the other end of the line here. So Dilyana, coming in live from Sofia in Bulgaria, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening.
Our pleasure. Now, Dilyana, will this be the first time that you have spoken in the UK?
Just once, I was interviewed by Patrick Kensington, and I was their guest twice, actually, to be honest. But no, that's the third time when I'm being invited to talk about international issues. Let's put it that way.
Excellent. Now, we have 3 other people that will be speaking in the UK for the first time, so you're very welcome. And unfortunately, you are the only female speaker, and this isn't through any bias on my part, quite the opposite. It just seems that finding female speakers who are available at this particular time of year is a little difficult. So thank you for at least providing the balance for us at this year's AV. Now, you've had some very interesting experiences over the past couple of years or so with your investigation into the surreptitious arms trading with the rebels in Syria. And I think that actually led to you having, how should I say, your employment contract terminated.
Yeah, you're right. It was by chance I was able to film Bulgarian weapons in 9 underground warehouses in Syria. They were used by Al-Nusra Front. This is the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, which is designated as a terrorist organization by the United Nations. I was reporting on the Battle of Aleppo in December and November, to be precise, of 2016. So while I was reporting on the ground in Syria as a correspondent for one Bulgarian newspaper through Daily, I was able to enter the area where the so-called moderate rebels were situated. When they retreated from their positions, I got inside these 9 underground warehouses full of heavy weapons with Bulgaria as their country of origin. So I filmed these weapons, I got the serial numbers, all information needed for me to complete my investigation. When I got back to my home country, I I published a series of investigations. I was leaked diplomatic notes from unknown sources. These leaked documents were diplomatic notes between the Azeri embassy in Bulgaria and the Bulgarian authorities, with a lot of other information, attached memos and diplomatic notes between other embassies and other countries. It was a huge international weapons shipment network, which these documents proved to be aimed at supplying weapons to terrorists in Syria. And I published the whole investigation, and I was about to get back to Syria to complete this investigation on the ground, but the Bulgarian authorities launched an investigation into, not my investigation, but into the cyber attack to which the Azeri embassy was subjected, and after which these secret memos were leaked to me and online. So they questioned me and wanted to know my sources, and they didn't pay any attention to the content of the documents. They just wanted to know who my sources were, and few hours, to be precise, 2 hours after my interrogation by the Bulgarian National Security Agency, I got a phone call from the secretary of the newspaper where I used to work, and she asked me to go to their office and to sign my resignation letter without any explanation. Yet I have had no explanation by my former editor-in-chief. He didn't want to talk to me. I also didn't want to talk to him because I knew very well the reason for my firing. And the reason for my firing was that first, I didn't share my sources with the Bulgarian National Security Agency, and secondly, they wanted to prevent me from continuing my investigation on the ground in Syria, and they did prevent my return to Syria. I couldn't get back to Syria to film further, but I did continue this investigation, and unfortunately, while I'm talking now, I can assure you that Bulgaria, and not only Bulgaria, and all these countries involved are continuing the weapon supplies to the so-called moderate rebels in Syria. That is why this war is still ongoing. All of us, I mean, journalists, all of us were expecting that probably it would take a few months for this war to finish. I'm talking about September of last year. When I published my investigation, it was in the summer of 2017. I was thinking, well, that we're almost nearing the end of this war. Nothing like this. Now you can see the war is ongoing because the weapon supplies are continuing, and they're continuing to flow to ISIS and Al-Nusra Front and other Islamist fractions there, because the weapon supplies have never stopped. And interestingly, these weapon supplies, the scheme involves diplomatic flights, which were carried out by a state-run company, the Silkway Airlines. This is the Azeri state-run company. And well, here we are talking about a huge international weapons shipment network involving high-ranking officials, involving the whole government, not only a private company or a smuggler or a group of criminals. No, we're talking about well-organized scheme under diplomatic cover involving the whole governments of tens of countries in Europe, the United States, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and etc. And this is still ongoing. Nothing has changed. No matter that Donald Trump announced the termination of the CIA program for armaments and training of the Syrian rebels, the program is still ongoing. Just it changed its name. Now it is something different, but it is still ongoing, and it is not needed to have documentation to prove that. You can just go to Syria and see what's going on the ground. Nobody hides the support that's coming from the United States using non-US standard weapons. I'm talking about Bulgarian weapons, Serbian, Croatian, and weapons coming originating from the Balkan states, because here on the Balkans, we produce non-US standard weapons, which are not compatible with the NATO standard and with the US standard or with the Saudi army standard, meaning that these weapons are not destined for neither the Saudi army nor the US army. They are destined for terrorists in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and other war zones, Afghanistan as well. I also got documents involving Pakistan, Afghanistan, African countries. It's something very, very huge. This is an international weapon shipment network for a lot of conflicts, war zones around the world, not only Syria. And now nobody paid attention. I was fired. In Bulgaria, there was, I even can't say investigation, it was a probe into the possibility of Bulgarian weapons being shipped to terrorists in Syria. They said, no, we don't have contracts proving that. Of course, they would not have contracts signed between the Bulgarian Prime Minister and Baghdadi or Julani, the leaders of ISIS or al-Nusra Front. Of course, they would not have. This was just the pretext to cover up the whole story, and they did cover up. In Bulgaria, besides this newspaper which published my investigation, nobody else published even a single word. Can you imagine? You have Bulgaria, the Bulgarian government involved. I'm talking about high-ranking officials involved in weapons which ended up in the hands of terrorists in Syria. And nobody from my colleagues even bothered to ask the Prime Minister or somebody else how this happened. Because under the European legislation, is the same in the UK and other EU member states, every weapon, a bullet or a rifle or whatever munitions are being exported, they need to have an approval and certificate and license, which is issued by a special committee. This committee includes a couple of ministers plus the head of the National Security Agency, meaning that the Bulgarian National Security Agency or the secret services of all countries involved are very well aware about well aware of these weapons ending up in the hands of terrorists, and they organize them. And these documents that I published prove that, but nobody paid attention. Nobody in my country, and not only in my country. Luckily, there were a couple of foreign media outlets which published this story, but in general, the mainstream media didn't pay attention. Just maybe 2 TV channels, mainstream TV channels, like Al Jazeera was one of them. Also, French TV channel, they paid attention, they published the story, and that was the end of the investigation. That's in short my visit card.
Well, of course, the reality is, if you want to keep conflict going, you've got to make sure that everybody has the right toys. And of course, it would be a little bit obvious if the Americans and the British and Israel were providing the weapons directly to these moderate terrorists. You got to wonder at this term, moderate terrorists. Anyway, But of course, what has happened here, it would seem, is that an effective underground channel has been created for these non-standard weapons. But somebody obviously is paying for them. And somehow I doubt that the money is coming from ISIS or Al-Nusra or any of the other groups there. So the question, of course, is who is actually sending the check or the wire transfer of the funds to purchase these weapons?
It is not. We are not talking about, for example, the Bulgarian government or the Serbian government or the Croatian government. The money comes not from there. The money comes, according to these diplomatic documents, the money comes from the United States, U.S. SOCOM, U.S. Special Operations Command, or the Pentagon, and Saudi Arabia, also the United Arab Emirates. I can provide these documents to everybody who wants to carry out an independent investigation, depending on the country from where the journalist is, so they can ask and praise their governments for answers, and you will see in the end user certificate, the end user is the U.S. Special Operations Command. It is the sponsoring party, meaning that the United States or the U.S. government pays about $2 billion over the last 3 years for weapons to Syria, only to Syria, totaling about yes, let's say $2 billion. But you have also Saudi Arabia. Talking about Saudi Arabia, we don't know how much money Saudi Arabia paid for weapons, or the United Arab Emirates, because if you follow the companies, well, I will explain in brief the scheme. The Pentagon or the CIA use private contractors, pay them to buy Bulgarian or Serbian or Croatian weapons, and to supply them to Syria via diplomatic flights. This scheme is often used by the CIA to provide cover for its agents using private contractors, because private contractors are not subjected to, they're not under the control of the Congress. They are more flexible, they can violate the law without being questioned, and they are not a state-run company. They are private contractors doing job for the CIA. So the program was and is still run by the CIA and the Pentagon as well. They have two separate but at the same time similar programs running weapons to Syria, and they pay for them. And Saudi Arabia is the other sponsoring party. For example, I was shocked in the documents that I received about these 350 diplomatic flights. You can see Bulgarian weapons being shipped to, let's say, Congo. But the sponsoring party is not, for example, the army of Congo or the police of Congo. The sponsoring party is Saudi Arabia. What interest does Saudi Arabia take in supplying weapons to the police in Congo? It is a very legitimate question. These weapons were redirected, they were diverted. They never ended up in Congo, in the police of Congo. You know the situation in Africa? There are many terrorist groups now operating in Africa as well, in different African countries. These weapons were directed to other war zones and other fractions, not the official army of the Republic of Congo. No, this is just on papers. Actually, using diplomatic flights, these countries, Saudi Arabia, for example, or the United States, I mean, not the country, but their representatives, the CIA or the Pentagon, they use diplomatic cover and supply weapons whenever they want to whoever they want under diplomatic cover. Diplomatic flights are exempt from checks, inspections, and air bills. So even now, while I'm talking now, I can't be sure exactly how many weapons were sent to Syria, because nobody checked them, nobody inspected the quality and the quantity of this. The quantity of these weapons. We're not sure. I have the documents, but I'm not sure what ended up in the hands of the terrorists. I can talk about those weapons that I saw myself and that I filmed. These were 122 millimeter Grad rockets. Can you imagine? The biggest lie. They say we're supplying weapons to the moderate rebels. How can rebels be moderate when they are heavily armed and when they kill civilians and when they have 122 millimeter Grad rockets? These weapons and these rockets are not for defense. These are offensive rockets. And I saw myself one of these rockets fell next to us and beheaded a mother and her child. In front of me, I saw this myself, coming from eastern Aleppo. At that point, eastern Aleppo was under the control of the so-called moderate rebels. To be precise, the Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front. I was with journalists from different mainstream media. Their correspondents were there. At that point, we were in a hotel in western Aleppo. Nobody of them even bothered to see the number of the victims, or at least to try to help, to do something, because this happened next to us, maybe just 50 or 100 meters from our hotel. Nobody from them bothered to go to film or at least to help. We're human beings. You see an emergency, you see a rocket, which probably killed somebody. Nobody bothered to see. This is because they all knew that this rocket was coming from eastern Aleppo, from the terrorist area, which they didn't call terrorist area. They call the revolutionaries, which were suffering, and we must help them. The Save Aleppo, other slogans. I even didn't want to read social media at that point because I was on the ground, and what was published on social media, it had nothing to do with the reality on the ground. So talking about the weapons, these weapons killed civilians, and my country and the government of my country was complicit in all these killings, because these weapons killed civilians. They didn't kill terrorists. And Bulgaria or the United States, Saudi Arabia and other countries, they didn't supply weapons for the fight against ISIS or Al-Qaeda in Syria. They supplied the terrorists themselves in Syria.
Well, I think it's becoming increasingly evident, I mean, maybe not in the US, but certainly in the UK, it's becoming increasingly evident, for certainly the last 5 years, that the British government has been desperately trying to do whatever it can to support the removal of Assad. And this is obviously the agenda of the US, the UK, of Israel, of Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's strange bedfellows here, but it's an old Islamic saying, isn't it? My enemy's enemy is my friend. Mm. And so we got some very strange bedfellows here looking to remove Assad. But Assad is hanging on in there. And I visited Syria many times in the 1990s, and I always found the hospitality of the people to be truly wonderful. And whilst there were certainly, as in any country, people have concerns about the government. I mean, I have incredible concerns. Somebody asked me to identify one thing that I thought the British government was doing right. And I had to say to them, I think you're going to have to help me with that one, because actually I can't, because we have a rogue government that does not have the interests of the British people at heart and is contributing directly to fueling these conflicts, not just in Syria, but elsewhere. And of course, more recently, there has been the allegation that MI6 are very directly involved with the White Helmets and actually set up the White Helmets to fake the latest gas attack in Duma in a bid to try to create a situation which legitimized the US, UK, and of course the French assault on Syria. So it's very, very clear that Syria is the center of the proxy war between the rogue nations, which is ostensibly those who are in the hock of the global banksters, and those that are still operating outside of the central banking system. And I think it was General Wesley Clark who, over a decade ago, reported that he'd seen a memo, or he'd been told about a memo that was doing the rounds in the Pentagon, that identified the countries that the US was effectively going to take out over the next decade or so. And every one of those countries has either been taken out or is in the process of being taken out. And the one that remains is effectively Iran and North Korea. And obviously Assad has got the support of Russia. And we've seen events in the UK recently which certainly contributed to taking the world to the brink of global conflict. So maybe we bring the conversation a bit back to more recent events now. But with the Sergei Skripal affair, you were obviously watching this as an investigative journalist from a very objective viewpoint, i.e. you're in Sofia, so you have the opportunity to get your information from a much wider set of resources than the majority of people in the UK. So from your perspective, what is your perception of what occurred with the attempted poisoning, assassination maybe, of Sergei Skripal and his daughter?
If something like this had happened in my country, the first question that I and my colleagues or other journalists would have asked would be, can we see the victims after they recovered? And Yulia Skripal, she was discharged from hospital, or at least the policeman or somebody. Can we see ourselves the victims? Because we haven't seen a single photo of Sergei and Yulia Skripal being unconscious or on this bench, or at least a single piece of evidence that this nerve agent poisoning really took place. Because I wonder if this was made public in the UK by the mainstream media, but there is a photo, not only one photo, a couple of photos taken by the local journalists in Salisbury on the third day, on the 7th of March, 3 days after the alleged nerve agent poisoning. And if you see this photo, in this photo, you can see the policeman, a UK policeman standing without protective gear.
Yeah, we have this photograph here. I think we're putting that up on screen. There we go.
On the front door of Sergei Skripal's home, and it's been said that the highest concentration of this Novichok nerve agent was found and isolated on the front door of Sergei Skripal's home. How can this policeman stay without protective gear if this information is really true? This is nonsense. It just contradicts the official narrative of the UK government, because this is one piece of evidence. You have the policeman without any protective gear on the front door, and he is not poisoned. This is. It was said. They say that this nerve agent, Novichok nerve agent, this is the most lethal nerve agent known to humanity. How is that possible? This policeman stands on the front door without any protection, and he is fine. He is not poisoned. this is nonsense. They knew very well that this was not true. Otherwise, this policeman would not stand without any protection on the front door. And this is on the third day after the poisoning, when they already declared that this incident involved nerve agent. So they knew very well there wasn't a nerve agent there. Otherwise, this policeman would not stay on the front door without protection. The second piece of evidence, the place of this whole alleged poisoning, Salisbury. Why Salisbury? It is just 13 kilometers from Porton Down. This is the UK military chemical and biological research laboratory. Very strange coincidence. You have military and secretive military biolaboratory and chemical laboratory 13 kilometers away, and you have a poisoning with a nerve agent. Very strange coincidence.
I must confess, Dilyana, that when I heard on the radio that there had been an incident in Salisbury, my immediate reaction was that something had got out in some way from Porton Down, because, you know, as you rightly say, the proximity is extremely close. So you're right. You know, I mean, that is certainly very, very suspicious. Somebody obviously didn't want to travel too far.
Third piece of evidence. This is information that I read from British newspapers. Not only one. Salisbury, one of the MI6 agents, former MI6 agents, Pablo Miller. This is the former MI6 agent who recruited Sergei Skripal a decade or 2 decades ago to work for the British intelligence services. So this same agent, former agent, also happened to live in Salisbury. The information about that was published by British media, and they made a screenshot. Luckily, they took a screenshot from LinkedIn profile of this former MI6 agent, Pablo Miller. So they saved this screenshot, luckily, because immediately after the publication, Pablo Miller just deleted his profile in LinkedIn, because it's a strange coincidence. Salisbury, the same city where the poisoning happened, Sergei Skripal lived there, Pablo Miller lived there, and Pablo Miller was his recruiter. And they also, both of them, worked in some capacity, we're not sure what exactly they did, for the author of the so-called Russian dossier, which made headlines in the United States. It was provided by, again, a former MI6 agent, and was leaked to BuzzFeed. I think only BuzzFeed published this Russia dossier, anti-Trump dossier. So you have a group of people, the same names, involved in scandals in the last 2 years involving Russia. Always against Russia. You have the same faces, the same names, and the same participants. And again, it is aimed at damaging Russia and the public international image of Russia. So many coincidences.
Well, Dilyana, what you may not be aware of is that in the weeks, or even months before this, the British press had been using every opportunity to demonize Russia and Vladimir Putin. You know, anything that occurred, it was Russia. Whatever it was, you know, blame Russia, blame Vladimir Putin. And it was just becoming absurd. And, you know, basically people were starting to ridicule it. And then this occurs, and it looks very much like this was a pathetic attempt to try to actually crystallize all of this demonization of Russia and Vladimir Putin.
For me, what matters is the fact that behind the known facts, or I don't want to say facts because this is presented to be true or to be facts, but we're not sure. We're even not sure that Novichok agent was used because there was an information or a report, confidential report by a Swiss laboratory.
Yep.
This report was sent to OPCW on their request to examine a few samples of the poison which was found, and these samples were taken from Yulia and Sergei Skripal. So they sent the different samples to different laboratories across Europe, and one of the laboratory that received these samples was a Swiss laboratory. It is certified laboratory working for OPCW, and according to this confidential report, they found traces of another. It is not even nerve agent. It is hallucinogenic chemical.
Yeah, BZ, known as BZ. Yeah.
And after journalists, or I think Russian journalists, tried to ask and to further their investigation into that information, that story, and the answer they got was, well, that's confidential. We can't share this confidential information with you, which is very strange. Why not? This is a public issue. You have at least, if this is true, at least I'm not sure how big city Salisbury is. Probably it's a.
I think it's about 100,000 people or so. It's not a big city. It's a relatively small rural city, about 100 miles from London.
You have 100,000 people probably allegedly exposed to a nerve agent, and this is confidential. That's nonsense. That's the way they just want to hide the truth.
Well, and of course, nobody else was affected by it.
Nobody was affected, and I watched a witness. It was probably the second or even the first or the second day, I'm not sure, after this so-called nerve agent attack, and this girl told something very important. She said they looked, Sergei and Yulia Skripal, they looked like they were high on something. They were drugged. They were. The first thing that she thought was they had taken drugs.
Yeah.
If you also read BBC, this was a BBC report, they cited the paramedic who treated Yulia Skripal, and this paramedic says something also very important. She says there was no traces of nerve agent on the face and body of Yulia Skripal. And this paramedic also says, I was afraid that I would be poisoned, I would be affected because they said that this was nerve agent, but I'm fine. I'm not affected. How is this possible? This is the most lethal nerve agent ever known to humanity, and the paramedic who treated the victim is fine. She's not affected. That's not possible. That's nonsense. And I think BBC, they published this the second or even the first day. I'm not sure. I must see exactly the dates, but this was the first days when they didn't know the official narrative, the official government agenda. So they published the facts as they probably were, or they just selected. They didn't select witnesses. They were there, published the real story. And if you go back to the first days of the reports, really you can see facts that, in my opinion, are worth investigating. The possibility of another chemical being used. This one, VZ, this is hallucinogenic chemical. It is not even a nerve agent. But
so the likelihood is that they were as high as a kite rather than rather than actually compromised by any kind of nerve agent.
And many questions, but for me as a journalist, and what I did was to try to check what programs have been running at Porton Down, because Porton Down is the UK military biological and chemical laboratory. And I found out that the Pentagon has spent at least $70 million in biological and chemical research projects at Porton Down. And I was shocked to find that some of the projects involve tests on animals with nerve agents, with anthrax, Marburg virus, and other deadly diseases. Animals were subjected to deadly diseases in order for the Porton Down scientists to measure time to death and lethal dose needed for this animal to die. And this is a component of or element of a biological weapons program. This is what the British journalist must ask Theresa May. What's going on there in this secretive military biolaboratory? Why a foreign government or a foreign state, in this case the United States, why are they spending $70 million on biological and chemical research projects at Porton Down, and they are allowed to be present inside this secretive military facility? I also found and also published an agreement between the UK and the US on joint biological research and chemical research projects. What are these projects? This is very scary. There was another project. Porton Down scientists tested gas on the London Tube in 2013. And what was shocking for me was that in the documents and the contract between Porton Down and the London Underground, Porton Down, first the London Underground prohibited from public disclosure of this information. And if they disclose any type of information, Porton Down is allowed to redact this information. The conclusion is that any information that is published to us, or at least that is made public to us, it may be redacted, because Porton Down or the UK Ministry of Defence may decide that this is national security, this is a matter of national security, and they can redact anything they want. So even in the case with the nerve agent poisoning, we are not sure what is true and what is not. I mean, of all the information that is officially confirmed, because they're allowed officially and legally to lie.
Well, the British government has been testing, chemical warfare, albeit limited, but it has been using the British population to test chemical warfare for the last 60 years. But when you spell out that just 5 years ago there was a contract between Transport for London and Porton Down to test chemical weapons on the tube, I wonder how that makes the millions of people who use the London tube system feel, knowing that at any given moment, Porton Down and the British government could have entered into a contractual arrangement with Transport for London to test bio-warfare materials on the tube. And then, of course, what they would do is blame it on Russia anyway.
Yes, they will say that it's Russia. Yeah,
of course.
It's very easy, and I'm not sure if people believe that. But what the journalist must do is to investigate Porton Down this military project, the foreign military project, because you have a foreign military program running at this UK military facility. You have foreigners there inside this facility funding military projects involving viruses, bacteria, toxins, and nerve agents. It's very dangerous. That is what the British journalist must do. And
but that, sadly, Dilyana, you make an assumption. You make an assumption that we have journalists in Britain. We don't. What we have today are simply cut and paste merchants. They literally take something from a local newspaper, cut it, and insert it into their own publication. Any journalist in the UK working for the mainstream media that is capable of independent thinking has a very limited career opportunity. You know, the British media today is very much on a par with the Soviet media back in the 1970s. The difference is that back in the 1970s and the 1980s, the residents of Soviet Russia knew very well that Pravda, primarily, and all the other outlets, were simply tools of the state to push out the propaganda. Sadly, although the circulation of British media is falling very rapidly as people lose confidence in it, we still have a significant chunk of the British population who believe the literal lies that are being pumped out. Now, it has to be said that the magnitude of the lies and deceit repeated by the likes of Boris Johnson, Theresa May, Gavin Williamson, Jonathan Allen, and the fact that not one of these individuals has retracted anything that they said about the Sergei Skripal affair. And in fact, that has actually served to undermine public confidence in these individuals as politicians. But then, of course, you know, as the Sergei Skripal affair unravelled, and it became very clear to even the casual observer that the allegations of a Novichok nerve agent were a total crock. Of course, they needed something more dramatic to take the headlines away from the Sergei Skripal affair, and that was what led to the MI6 involvement with the white helmets to create this fake nerve attack. And of course, it's almost exactly 1 year after the last attempt, and the last attempt was almost exactly 4 years after the August 13 attempt, and I'm sure they'll do it again. But it was MI6, the white helmets, attempting to create an event to give the US, the UK, and Israel the opportunity, and France, to launch an assault on Assad. But for the British government, the primary benefit of that was to take the attention away from anyone continuing to probe into the facts behind the Sergei Skripal affair.
Yeah. Also, I'm sure this information didn't make headlines there, but for the rest of the world, this is information which is well known. In Duma, at that point, if you follow the military reports coming from Syria, at that point, when the so-called chemical attack happened, there was a group of foreign agents operating on the ground to support the Islamists so that they can regroup and they can escape from Duma on the buses. There was a ceasefire agreement, and these militants were they managed to escape Duma. Some of them on buses. They moved to other areas so that the Syrian army could enter and free the area and to remove the militants from this place to another place. This is something typical of every war around the world. This is how things happen. You have negotiations. One of the two sides retreats, and the other side takes over anyway. So at that point, this is what happened. The Syrian army almost got full control over Douma. The journalists covering Arab journalists covering the events on the ground from Al Maidin. By the way, this is a very successful Arab TV channel. It almost maybe doubles the audience of the Arab audience of Al Jazeera in Arabic. So Al Maidin, their reporters, I met them. I saw how they work on the ground. They're very brave. They lost many of their reporters because they were on the ground, on the front lines, reporting live. What happens? They report it. They don't lie. They just turn on the camera and show to their viewers what's going on in Syria. So what they showed was British agents, Britons, probably MI6 agents inside Douma. They were captured by the Syrian army in Douma. After that, probably due to the secret information or other secret negotiations with the UK, I'm not sure, this information disappeared. We don't know what happened to this MI6, probably MI6, but for sure British citizens inside Douma at that point. These were not the white helmets. These were MI6, probably MI6 officers operating in Douma at that point with the white helmets. Probably there were negotiations with the Syrian government. I'm not sure how exactly this ended, and nobody reported on that fact. You have British officers undercover in Douma. Alleged chemical attack happens, and nobody asks what these British citizens were doing in Douma at that point. At least you can ask, are these militants? They're foreigners. They are not supposed to be there with the Islamists from this radical group operating in Douma. But they were there on the ground, facilitating them. Nobody asked this question. Also, if you see footage posted online by the white helmet, it's funny. You have everything is absolutely staged. You have a cylinder, gas cylinder, which is absolutely intact, but at the same time, it is put inside a totally devastated building, and we're supposed to think that this intact, even not open cylinder, damaged the roof, damaged the whole building, and ended up in the bed without damaging the bed. Without, if you see a cylinder, gas cylinder after explosion, you can compare this intact cylinder, not even open, and a cylinder, gas cylinder, which is fired and can cause such damage. No, nothing like this. Everything was absolutely staged, fake, and I even don't want. I think people don't need proof, because OPCW yesterday confirmed that they found no chemical
Absolutely.
weapons on the ground in this facility that the US bombed, on the pretext that probably, or not probably, they were sure, because they saw the social media footage, and this is intelligence evidence for them. This footage posted on social media with the bed and the intact gas cylinder. This is the best intelligence evidence for the CIA to convince Donald Trump to bomb Syria. And I think people don't believe that story. I think they don't believe that narrative. But for me, as a foreigner, what was shocking, I didn't know that fact, was that the husband of Theresa May is very much involved in the military-industrial complex.
Absolutely.
Probably you can give more information on that. I read this for the first time a week ago. For me, this is disgusting conflict of interest. And you have a prime minister who authorizes airstrikes on a foreign country. And the husband of this prime minister produces these missiles that are going to be used for the airstrike. This is, for me, this can't happen even in my country. I mean, I come from Eastern Europe. Bulgaria is one of the most corrupt countries in the European Union. This can't happen.
After the UK.
Really, for me, this was shocked. And I have seen a lot. I have seen the Bulgarian weapons in Aleppo. I have seen many shocking stories over my for 15 years of journalistic career. For me, that story with Theresa May and her husband, it was complete shock. How can this happen? Nobody asks Theresa May. It is not only a matter of questions. I think this is, do you have such legislation which allows such conflict of interest? And in Bulgaria, we have a legislation and it doesn't allow such conflict of
well,
interest.
when you live in what is effectively a corporatist dictatorship with a facade of democracy, then, you know, pretty much the rule of law just evaporates. And, you know, it's well known in this country that Theresa May's husband, you know, has very close associations with these industries, and particularly a company called G4S, which, you know, can be found globally wherever there is any kind of conflict. I mean, it's along the same sort of lines as Bechtel. You know, these companies will benefit from any conflict. It's, you know, it's what is it? Naomi Campbell called it crisis capitalism. It's not capitalism. It's corporatism. You know, there's a massive difference. It's solely about greed, and more greed. And, you know, for those that have already got everything they could ever want, it's about power. And, you know, what you are realizing, and hopefully many other people around the world are realizing, is that the UK is a rogue state. You know, many years ago, it was when there was a British Empire, you know, it was often said that, you know, the sun never set on the British Empire because God didn't trust the British in the dark. Well, you know, that's still pretty much the case today. But, of course, the problem is that Britain can't do this alone. So it does it with the US and, of course, Israel. And it was revealed just a couple of days ago that the UK has increased its arms sales to Israel by 14-fold just in the last 7 years. So, you know, and as we've obviously been discussing, you know, if you want global conflict, you've got to make sure that both sides have all the necessary toys to keep the conflict going, you know, which is why the US was feeding both Saddam Hussein and Iran weapons during the Iran-Iraq war between 82 and 88. Because otherwise it would have been over very, very quickly, because they would have both run out of armaments. So the US just kept shipping them in. And of course, this is what's going on now with Syria, you know, to keep the conflict going, because as you rightly said, you know, Assad had won the battle. Everybody understood Assad had won. And yet, obviously, the rebels somehow keep going, and that's thanks to the US, the UK, and Israel. And then, of course, you know, what happens with this fake chemical attack, where the media goes into overdrive, and, you know, the world is once again looking at the prospects of nuclear conflict. I mean, you know, for a few days, it was very, very similar to the atmosphere of the Cuba Missile Crisis of the early 1960s, you know, where everybody really wondered what was going to break out here. And it would have absolutely been the fault of the British had global conflict kicked off, because, you know, it was the British who were pushing the lie. And the report reached me, and in fact, I did make a statement about it on one of my morning live streams, because report reached me that 26 British personnel had been captured by the Syrian forces, and it wasn't just MI6, or it was a combination of MI6 and SAS special forces. And obviously, nobody knows, where the whereabouts of those individuals. But then, when the conflict looked like it was going to kick off, and obviously this was a couple of weeks ago, it was the early hours of April 14th, and it looks like there was a conflict between John Bolton, as the newly appointed National Security Advisor, and John Mattis, the Secretary of State for Defence, because Mattis is very much a dove. He's not driven by the need for global conflict. But John Bolton is a socio-psychopath of the highest order. This is a very, very dangerous man. In fact, I've got a picture of him here, I think. There we go. And for at least the last 25 years, John Bolton has been trying to initiate World War III. And now he is National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. And in fact, here was a comment made by Richard Painter, who was the former White House ethics lawyer for George W. Bush. And he said, John Bolton is by far the most dangerous man that they had in the Bush government in the entire 8 years. And he said last week that Bolton's potential appointment as security advisor was an invitation to war, perhaps nuclear war. And it looked like Bolton, only being in the job a few days, had managed to achieve that objective. But fortunately, common sense prevailed. And Dilyana, tell me whether you think my analysis here is off the mark. But it actually looked to me like Trump, May and Macron needed to save face. So they weren't going to back down. But they knew there was no truth in the allegation of Assad using chemical weapons. So Mattis, who is very much a statesman, something we don't have here in the UK anymore, but Mattis is a statesman, and it looks like he contacted his counterpart in Russia and said, look, we need to shut this down. So, we need to do a one-off, and he did say it was a one-off, we need to do a one-off attack. So, if there's any old military complexes that Bashar Assad needs demolished, give us the coordinates, make sure there's nobody around, and, we'll lob a few missiles over. You can test out, or Assad can test out his missile defences, and, we'll demolish those buildings, and then we'll put this to bed. Because that's what it looked like happened. And thanks be to God that, the gameplay, because that's what it was, the gameplay served everybody. They got what they wanted. They were able to save face. But what it's done is it's completely neutered now any suggestion that we're on the brink of global conflict. And it's, I won't say business as usual, because we've still got the problem, obviously, of the US, the British, the French, the Israelis, and everybody else that they're paying, shipping armaments into the terrorist groups. But hopefully, there will be less appetite for these countries to support those rebels. What do you think?
It's very hard to predict what will ensue in the end, because I really thought that this war was about to finish. Donald Trump made an announcement a few weeks ago. I'm going to withdraw our troops from Syria. We're not any longer interested in Syria. Look at what happened. Every day you have different statements by Donald Trump or by other politicians. It's very hard to predict because nothing comes on plan in Syria or elsewhere in the global politics. What is interesting for me as a reaction, because in Bulgaria we have for example, we have one foundation, American foundation, which is called America for Bulgaria, which was set up to fund Bulgarian media. So they pour hundreds of millions of dollars in Bulgarian media to keep them pushing the official American agenda in Bulgaria, trying to spread phobia against Russia.
Yeah.
In Bulgaria, we call it a different way. The Russian word, the Bulgarian language is very close to the Russian. Anyway, so they try to prejudice the Bulgarian people against Russia. The recent poll about the Bulgarian attitude, they asked the Bulgarian public, do you think Russia was behind the Skripal attack? Who do you support, the UK government or the Russian government? The majority of the Bulgarians, 88%, answered we side with Russia, which is, for me, it was very surprising, because I follow the news in Bulgaria, and people are forced to hate Russia, to think that Russia is the evil in this world. Russia will destroy us. But in the end, you have 88% of the people supporting Russia, and this poll was, it is trustworthy because it was paid for by the Bulgarian government. The Bulgarian government wanted to decide whether to expel Russian diplomats or no, because it is a different issue in Bulgaria. We are a NATO member, but at the same time we are neighbors with Russia. It's complicated in Bulgaria. Anyway, so this global hates policy, I don't know how to put it. Actually, it backfires.
Yes.
People start to think, why is all this propaganda against Russia? Probably Russia is not that bad. I mean, people start to think there's something behind this all-out attack against Russia. And I noticed this in Bulgaria. My observation is, the harder they attack Russia, the less credible their attempts are perceived by the people. So probably this strategy doesn't work, and they will realize and change the strategy, because this strategy, the Syrian strategy, the Skripal's strategy, it just doesn't work. They need something new, so it's very hard to predict whether the common sense will prevail, or the greed, as you put it, the greed, because the result in the end is some $million or pounds in the bank account of Theresa May and her husband. This is the result. That can be counted. We can't count the victims in Syria. We stopped counting them, but we can count probably the profits, the price of the shares of the Theresa May husband's company, which produced these missiles. We can count the money, and that's what matters in the end. Who profits from these conflicts?
Exactly.
Is the one who staged the conflicts and who fuel the conflicts. And you see who has interest in fueling the conflicts and who profits from them. Not only, you said they put face, they put money in their bank accounts. That's the truth. In Bulgaria, if a politician does something like this, he would use at least offshore company. They even don't use offshore companies, meaning that they don't care.
No. The British nation is one of the most dumbed down nations on the planet after the US, and this has been a strategy, over the last 50 years to literally dumb the population down, and of course put them into massive debt. The debt in the US and private debt in the UK is a very, very powerful control mechanism. But Dilyana, we're right out of time. And it's been wonderful to share this last hour and a quarter with you. And thank you so much for your insights. I mean, I do have this picture of you when you were in, if I find it here somewhere, of this picture of you when you were in. Do I have the picture? Oh, I've lost. Oh, there we go. Here we do. There we go. That's you in Syria. You now, along with the likes of Vanessa Beeley, are amongst the increasingly rare breed of real investigative journalists. Not those who rely on the cut and paste reports that in many cases were prepared by journalists, inverted commas, who literally sit in a bedroom, with a computer screen. And sadly, an increasing number of reports that are produced by artificial intelligence. And, this is something that I know we're going to be talking about at AV9. But meanwhile, Dilyana, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I'm absolutely looking forward to meeting with you in person, as I know everyone else that's coming to AV9 is too. And I know you're going to be sharing another avenue of research, very much related to what we've been discussing tonight, but it's going to show the true depth of your work as a investigative journalist. So thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you in person on Friday week.
Thank you so much for having me. Much appreciated. And for me, what matters is that I can speak up freely with Western journalists and Western people like you. This is amazing. This means that they can't stage everything. They can't brainwash people anymore. We are power, and we are a real force to be reckoned with. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dilyana. Okay, well, that's all for this evening. And as I said earlier, there are still day tickets available. The waiting list for the residential accommodation at AV9 is actually relatively short. So if you do want to put your name onto the waiting list, then give me a call. The numbers are on the Alternative View website. So it's been a very interesting start to 2018, and sadly it's going to become even more interesting, and in particular with the rollout of the 5G. And this is a subject that we will be discussing at Alternative View. In fact, Mark Steele, who's very much on point and raising awareness of the 5G threat, will be at AV, and will also be conducting a workshop on the Monday afternoon. But it seems that the culling of trees is now spreading, as we predicted, to other towns and cities across the UK. And this was flagged up to the UK column earlier today. And this is the headline in the Plymouth Herald. Angry woman hits out at the stripping of magnificent and beautiful trees. Residents said that she wanted to cry after seeing rows of trees left looking desperately sad. And of course, this is the precursor to the culling of the trees, because the trees are a major problem for the microwave frequencies that will be employed by the 5G networks, which of course are essential for introducing the Internet of Things, which was first mooted in 1999, so it's 21 years it'll be since the Internet of Things was mooted and the rollout of 5G. Now in Sheffield, I'm pleased to say that since March the 19th, so literally in the space of 5 weeks, the level of awareness of the relationship between the 5G rollout and the culling of 17,500 trees has reached a level where Sheffield City Council have now put a pause on any further culling. But despite a Freedom of Information request being submitted, Sheffield City Council have refused to reveal the detail of their contract worth £2.2 billion with Amy, who have a very close relationship with Telefonica, which is trading as O2 in the UK. So what we're going to see, if we're not careful, is more of the trees that were planted in the towns and cities around the UK over the last 200-300 years being culled for the purpose of rolling out 5G. The implications of this are enormous. And as I've said many, many times, it's really important that people do their own research. But unless communities start to take an interest in the corporatist agenda, then sadly, the legacy that we leave future generations will be truly unimaginable. Anyway, at AV9, there will be some 300 people who still retain capacity for independent thought and are also determined to participate in some way to bring about the changes that we all know we need to see. Not in the timescale necessarily that we might like, but nonetheless, to keep the momentum going, to bring about the demise of the global corporatists and the socio-psychopathic agenda that does certainly not have humanity's best interests at heart. So thank you for joining us this evening. My thanks to my guest, Dilyana Gaytandzhieva. And I won't be back with an episode of Humanity versus Insanity next Thursday, but in 3 weeks from now. So thanks for joining us and take care. Bye now.